What's the haps, class?
Excuse me.
All right, Professor.
Good morning, class. I'm your new professor. Professor Jackson Michael. Hyphenated Reaganomics. All right, class. Who knows what we're learning today? Anyone? No one. You guys need to wake up. We are on a slow burn this morning, guys. Now, who read the book last night, like I said? Anyone? Raise your hand. No one read the book? How am I supposed to teach?
How can I reach these kids?
Got it. Back to basics. Learn about hyperbolas. Hyperbolas. Hyperbolas.
Professor Jackson Michael, aren't they called hyperbolas?
No. They're called hyperbolas.
All right, class. Let's talk about hyperbolas. Now see, in your standard form hyperbola equation, x squared over a squared minus y squared over b squared equals 1. Always 1. Now, a is your distance from your center, in the center of the graph at 0, 0, to your vertice. B is your height from the center to the top of the rectangle. And using the rectangle, you draw 2 diagonal lines using the corners through the center of your graph. Now, when y comes first, your graph will be flipped 90 degrees, and your equation in standard form will be y squared over a squared minus x squared over b squared, and that will still all equal 1. So your focal axis, in this case the x-axis, is the axis that your vertice appears on. All right, class, so now we're going to talk about the foci. All right, so is everybody groovy with that? Oh, class, it looks like someone's not groovy with that. All right, all right.
What's your question?
Aren't they called foci?
Okay, okay. So you want to call them foci, is that correct? That's what you've been told. Well, let me tell you about the word foci. The word foci is not okay by any means. I thought in Nam. Do you know what they called it in Nam? A foci. Do you know what they are in Nam? They're communists. Do you know what communists are? They're not us. We are Americans. I did not watch that many men die, so I could call them foci. They are folky. Jesus. Okay, okay. Dial it back, Jackson Michael. Dial it back. You're a professor. Back to math. Math. So on your foci, when you have x coming first, plus and minus c will go in the x spot. And when you have y coming first, plus and minus c will go in the y spot. On your vertices, with x first, plus and minus a will go in the x spot. And when y comes first, plus and minus a will go in your y spot. For the semi-transversive axis, if you have x coming first, it will be a. And with y coming first, it will be b. For the semi-conjugate axis, when you have x coming first, it will be b. And when you have y coming first, it will be a. For the Pythagorean relation, c squared equals a squared plus b squared when x comes first. When y comes first, c squared will equal a squared plus b squared. So it's the same thing. Okay, so for the asymptotes, y equals plus and minus b over ax when x comes first.
Don't you mean asymptotes?
Shut up! When y comes first, y equals plus and minus a over b times x. So when your center is h and then k, it's slightly different. your standard form becomes x minus h squared over a squared minus y minus k squared over b squared, and that equals 1. Now when you're starting with y minus h squared over a squared minus x minus k squared over b squared equals 1 again. Now your focal axis, when you're beginning with x, is going to be y equals k. And when you begin with y, it'll be x equals h. And your foci, when you're starting with x, is going to be h plus and minus c, and then k. When you start with y, it is going to be h, k, plus and minus c. For the vertices, when you're starting with x, it's going to be h plus and minus a, and then k. And for y, it's going to be h and then k plus or minus a. The semi-transversive axis, semi-conjugate axis, and Pythagorean relation are all going to remain the same. For the ass and potatoes, when you're starting with x, y is going to equal b over a times x minus h plus k. When you're starting with y equals plus and minus a over b times x minus h plus k. All right, so you'd find your centers at -3, 1, and your vertices are going to be -7, 1, and 1, 1. And then you would go b units up from each vertice and b units down. And you use this to create your box. Diagonal lines through the corners. And then you will draw 2 parabolas staying close to your diagonal lines through the vertices. And now, as you can see, it has created 2 bowl shapes. And since there are 2 of them, it is hyperfied. And that's why you call it a hyperbole. It only makes sense. You could say, class, that I just gave you all a hyper bowl of knowledge.
Yeah! Won't get fooled again!